But our first speaker this afternoon, I'm thrilled to have her in Milwaukee and back. She's from this region, is Heidi Hackemer. She's the former brand strategist for Google Glass, and she's now founder and director of strategy at Wolf and Wilhelmine. She's worked in both the US and Europe with brands and companies like Google Chrome, Chromebook, Google Glass, Axe, Lego, Sony, Procter & Gamble, Diet Coke, National Geographic, Derek Lam, and the BBC. And I had the express honor of working with her when I was working on Axe when she was in New York. She was named one of the top 10 women to watch in advertising in 2013. And before starting at Wolf and Wilhelmine, Heidi served as the director of brand for Google's Advanced Technology and Projects Group, overseeing the master brand and the launch of specific projects. I think I mentioned Google Glass, which is awesome. So she's worked for agencies like FCB and Anomaly, BBH, and has been the strategist of award-winning creative. And because she has so much spare time on her hands outside of work, she created 6 Items or Less, a clothing consumption experiment, and spent 2 years traveling the country for her American Dream project. She's a runner, an avid Harley rider, and a lover of opera. So please put your hands together for Heidi Hackemer. It's great to have you back in Milwaukee.
Thank you. About 10 years ago, I went to the Metropolitan Opera in New York City to see Richard Wagner's Tristan and Isolde. Tristan and Isolde is a doozy of an opera. It's 5 hours long. It's pretty painful to sit through, to be honest with you. And it's this epic tale of love and loss and of risk, and there's heroes and there's enemies, and at the root of it, there's human fallibility. So we're 5 hours in, and it's the last scene of the opera, and I start to weep. I'm completely overcome by this story that has been unfolding in front of me for the last 5 hours. The last note lingers, the conductor drops his baton, and something really unusual happens. There's silence. Nobody moves. Nobody makes a sound. And the crowd sits like that for 3 or 4 minutes, which, if you think about it, that's a really long time to sit in a house silent. Slowly, someone starts to timidly clap, and then we all steadily join in. The actors on stage stir, the lights very slowly come up, and I see all around me glassy eyes and wet faces. People who have just been transported somewhere, slowly coming back to earth. And as we slowly move out of the house, I was struck by how we as a group just went through this incredibly profound experience together. We had communed in ritual and story. Something in that story touched us all deeply, and we had all been changed by it. Stories. Stories play a profound role in our existence. They bind us together. They give us compasses to navigate the world around us, and societies cannot function without stories. So why am I talking about stories at an innovation conference? I should be talking about Google Glass or some of the other stuff that I've worked on. Well, because brands are stories. And no matter what we innovate or what products we have, the stories we put around them are the permission that we have to connect those products to culture. And because I think what we innovate, if we want that to touch people, we need to create brand stories around those innovations. Now, let's be honest, the stories that we create, not quite Tristan and Isolde. I'm not going to pretend that I am Richard Wagner making one of the greatest operas ever written in the world. But we need to create the stories nonetheless. We need to make stories that bolster great products and then in turn create great brands. Because think about your favorite brands. Your favorite brands have heroes, they have enemies, they have believers, and the greatest brands, I think, have haters even. If people hate your brand, that's not always the worst thing. They have tensions and challenges and things that they have to overcome. Great brands have missions, they have quests, they have rallying cries. And a great brand, a magnetic brand, a successful business driving brand, essentially is just a great story. And in our culture, for better or worse, these brand stories are the narrative threads that we each individually collect identify with, and weave into a greater rope of our personal tale of life. So why do we as a society let brands and their stories play that role? Isn't that kind of gross? It's kind of materialistic. Well, I think it has something to do with the fact that we don't gather around the campfires anymore. And we increasingly don't go to a place every week and worship and find stories that help us navigate life. And yet we're hardwired as a species for these collective stories that bind us together. So I think we find them where we can get them. And great brands tell them. And that in turn gives us navigation points, if we choose to use them, to make sense of our own story. Now, what I find terribly exciting about the world and the innovation space today, with all the opportunities and technology and change that we're all fueling together, is that we get to make products and services that are new and hopefully good. With these new kinds of products at the root, we get to tell better stories about the future. And then, hopefully, we get to make that better future. Now, a few years back, a lot of my branding work, quite honestly, was putting lipstick on a pig. We knew that the products weren't that great. At their root, they weren't essentially good, but we would push that aside and create the wrapper around it, blah, blah, blah. Classic old school branding. Thank God that's changing. Because now the bar is higher, and people demand more, and the innovation explosion that we're all part of in response to this demand is about making great things for the world. So the stories that we should tell about those things should be equally really, really good. Because if they're not, even the greatest innovations are easy to misunderstand or even ignore. But here's a problem that I see. There's a wall that I sometimes run into between the innovators and the story makers. And we both contribute to that wall. And it drives me absolutely insane. Around 2009 or 2010, I don't quite remember the year, I started feeling a familiar drumbeat in the innovation and tech spaces, and I'm guessing that a lot of people in this room heard it too. It was, I have a brilliant product, I don't need a brand, the product is the marketing. We've all heard that, right? There's been a lot of articles written about this, the product is the marketing. You know, I really love Field of Dreams too. And wouldn't it be really wonderful if we could just build that widget or gidget or app or service or whatever, and they would come? That'd be great. But let's be honest, are you guys looking up at the internet every morning trying to find the next great innovation that's going to change your life that you're going to buy into and tell your friends about? Why do we expect other people to do that for us? It's just not going to happen. It's too much work. So like it or not, we have to reach out to people, and we have to tell them the story that they believe in to get their attention. Now look, I get it. I've worked a lot in the Valley. I've run into this a lot. Building a brand isn't the core thing that you're worried about when you're innovating. It's not cheap to do it. It's a semi-murky creative process. It takes work, and work that can potentially divert from the actual thing that you're in love with and that you're making and that you're doing. So when it comes down to it, a brand is not cleanly quantifiable. Anyone that says you can test a brand story with certainty is full of crap. Don't ever let someone sell that to you. Ever. You can't. I wish you could. It'd make my job a lot easier, but you can't. It's a story. And if stories were quantifiable, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone wouldn't have been rejected 12 times. They could have put it through the story study, and they would have known right away that it was going to be a smash global hit. And publishers wouldn't have told J.K. Rowling, hey, honey, don't quit your day job. It happened, and it happens to a lot of great stories. But in the land of data and code, of hard products and measurements and numbers and budgets, saying something isn't quantifiable isn't always received with joy and happiness. But I think that innovators need to get comfortable that yes, us brand builders, we do use data, and we use a lot of research to fuel our stories. But at some point, the best brand stories are a creative leap. There's a gut instinct that comes into play. It doesn't mean that it's fluff. It doesn't mean that it's not going to work. It just means it's a different process. It's very right brain and left brain. And that's okay. Let me tell you a story about making a story. A few years back, Google made this great browser called Chrome. I'm guessing a few people in the audience have heard of Chrome. And when it came to functionality, right in the beginning, especially when it first shot out, Chrome totally kicked ass. Totally kicked ass. And the geeks loved it. And we had absolutely zero problem with getting the geeks to download Chrome and talk to other geeks about how amazing Chrome was. Life was really good. But Google brass and the lead engineer, Sundar Pichai, they had a bigger ambition. They didn't just want the geeks to love Chrome. They wanted the housewives in Kansas to love Chrome. They wanted the students in Ghana to love Chrome. They wanted the businesswoman in Singapore to love Chrome. So even though Sundar led this team that built this incredible product and had every right to pull what I lovingly call the engineer sneer and dismiss the marketing stuff as fluff, they went the opposite direction. And the quest was on to build the Chrome brand. Now, I was super lucky to work on the team that got the brief. And we made this little ad, among other things, called Dear Sophie. I've seen that ad like 400 times, and it still gets me every time she giggles. I love that ad. So most innovators make the mistake of seeing an audience, an early adopter audience, swarming around their product, and they use that as evidence that they don't need to build a brand. Because at that moment, it's really tempting to take the stance that I don't need to do much more. Word's gonna spread. I'm good. I got my core audience in, let's go. I think that's really dangerous. I think you're putting faith in people to work for you. And frankly, there's a lot of brands that want me to work for them, and I don't have time. I mean, do you? I think once you extend out of that core audience, especially when it comes to newfangled tech and newfangled ideas and things that the world hasn't seen before, you must build an emotional doorway, a story that gives more people permission to interact with you and to fall in love with you. Dear Sophie and all the work that we did on that campaign was that emotional doorway. It got people to care about, download, and use a web browser. Let's think about that for 1 second, a web browser. Talk about the most boring, esoteric product in the world. How are you going to get people to do that? But we got millions, hundreds of millions of people around the world to do it. And because before we launched, the research told us that most people couldn't give a rat's ass about a web browser. And then all of a sudden they did. Now, of course, the comms and the brand story were matched with other really good marketing and distribution levers. But when Chrome shot up to be the #1 browser in the world from nothing within a year and a half of the campaign launching, I can say with a little bit of confidence that I think the brand story we built had something to do with that. So why are innovators suspicious of marketers and branders? Doesn't everyone want their Dear Sophie? Well, because a lot of work in marketing and branding and advertising is bullshit. Let me tell you one more story. A few years back, it was time for me to make a move in my career, find the next big thing, but I couldn't find it. and nothing really sparked. I was looking around, nothing caught me as that's what I should do. So one day I'm sitting in my office in New York City, and there's a stack of research reports like this high sitting on the floor next to me, and my Twitter feed is galloping in front of me, and I was suddenly hit with this bitch of a thought. Buy a truck and drive around America. And so for about 2 years, I drove. I drove and I slept in the back of that truck. I shunned the thick blue lines of the interstate and went for the little black squiggly lines on the map instead. I shared a lot of campfires. I ate at a lot of small town diners. And when I would run out of money, I would bounce back into New York for a few months, freelance, make some cash, and then go find the truck and go back out again. Back and forth, back and forth. As I sat at those diners and shopped at those Walmarts and talked to the mechanics and then whipped back to New York to work in the walls of marketing, I realized in a really painful way that I was dangerously close to becoming a fraud. I had been pulling that asshole move of pretending that I understood people and the stories that we needed to tell by merely looking at data points on a spreadsheet. I fell into that lazy space where you think focus group rooms are enough to understand people and to understand stories. Now, there was some good that came out of it. It wasn't just a lot of self-flagellation. I also realized in those 2 years that I do love brand planning, but I knew if I wanted to continue doing it with integrity, something had to change. Because the world is changing. And increasingly, in the products we contribute to and the stories we tell, our job is to interact meaningfully with the world more than ever before. And the norms of the advertising and marketing industry just don't let us do it. People in advertising work like dogs. Margins are thin, and to be honest, a lot of agencies, they're beautifully designed sweatshops. 60, 70, 80 hours a week is totally normal. At the same desk, in the same building, surrounded by the same people and the same walls, with impossibly fast headlines, and everything getting tested to death. These are the conditions that we somehow think we can create stories that inspire. Doesn't make any sense. And I don't buy it. And it's really ironic because just at the moment where we as an industry need to be at our bravest, when we're competing against a flood of content like this, and my lord, if Beyonce posts something on her Tumblr, everything stops. Our stories, they're getting duller. They're getting safer. They're getting more anemic. We're taking shortcuts that are dangerous. Shortcuts like using one person on a project when we should use two. Or shortcuts like skimping on really understanding people and starting processes without any real cultural understanding or empathy. Or taking 10 days of work and doing those 10 days in 2. The thinking is getting thin. And we mask this thin thinking with shiny models and impressive presentations and platitudes. We mask it with bullshit. I think it's time to consider that, although there are a lot of kind, thoughtful, brilliant, smart, creative people that work in the industry, the machine that we operate in might be fundamentally flawed, and it's keeping us out of touch. I mean, we're working hard, but I'm not convinced we're putting the right kind of hard work. And as a result, we're not bringing enough new to the table. If our industry wants to survive, if our industry wants to start getting properly radically obsessed with two things, creativity and people. We need to get radically creative if we're going to compete with Bay Arthur's Pizza. You know what creativity requires? There's tons of research about what creativity requires. You know the best thing to do if you want to be creative? Take a nap. A 15-minute nap in the afternoon actually makes you wicked creative. I don't see a lot of nap rooms popping up in our creative agencies or in our innovation spaces. It requires mental space. It requires new ideas to come in, to collide with the old ones, to create even newer ideas. And it requires time for rest. Your brain has to shut down a little bit. You can't keep making it work if you want something creative to come out of it. And we need to get radically human and connect with people. Talk to people, understand people. People, not consumers. Guess what? No one wants to be your consumer. If we don't start respecting creativity and people as an industry, we're dead. And I don't think having 60-hour work weeks is respecting that, and I don't think reducing people to a tweet or a paragraph in a report does that either. No amount of fancy keynote transitions or complicated theoretical models are going to save us. Our stories will simply cease to inspire, and people will go to Beyoncé's Tumblr. And soon, if not already, those on the receiving end of our output will see it. So yeah, I think sometimes, a lot of times, we earn our reputation in the innovation space being full of shit and not being worth the investment. So I can see why innovators roll their eyes at brand and branders. But here's the thing. We all need each other. The world needs better products. It has to happen. We need to have better solutions, better services, better ways of integrating with the world. And all of those things that get created, they need those stories around them. Because the reality of our world, if we like it or not, is that the stuff we buy and the beliefs that we put into them plays a huge role in the health and values of our capitalistic society. We all have to do better together. The people in this world, our work can shape the world because products and stories shape the world. And we need to partner up and each do our jobs right because, like it or not, we need each other. So, what can I leave you with? A few things. You wouldn't be here if you didn't believe in the future. That's awesome. Let's make an awesome future. Let's use all the smart and tech and ideas to make a world we believe in. Go team. Yes, we're all here and we're part of the same mission. Now, for all the innovators in the audience, I would say this. Don't ever forget that there are people on the other side of your thinking. Real people. People who really don't need another product, but they do need things to align with and believe in. We are hardwired to look for stories. And you have an amazing opportunity to give them new stories with your product at the center of it. For the marketers out there, we've been saying for years that the world is changing, but what are we really doing about it? We might need to blow a few things up to keep pace with the world. We might need to get a bit radical if we're serious about what we do. Radical about creativity, radical about people, radical about the way we structure our teams, our rhythms of working, and our relationships with each other. I know, right now the ship is sailing, and it all seems pretty good. But let's not be on the Titanic, okay? So, go change the world, work hard and be nice to people, and be stupidly brave. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi.